I'm here with Kat Gallardo, also known as KATGRÜVS. She's a contemporary fingerstyle guitarist who has shared the stage with Van Larkins, Cocky King, Adrian Belew, Muriel Anderson, Christy Lene, and Vicky Geffen. And she just released her latest EP, Get Groovy, from which all the proceeds go to the UC Davis COVID-19 Support Fund and to fighting the pandemic. Welcome, and thanks for chatting with me, Kat.
Thank you for having me, Ben.
Yeah, it's great to meet. We've never connected,
Yeah.
obviously, and I was first aware of your record when I think you had posted a link to it on one of the fingerstyle forums or Facebook groups, and I just saw the amazing artwork with the cat, and I was like,
Yeah.
"What is
So the
this?"
artwork was done by the amazing Sean DeBorca. He's also very active in the fingerstyle community as well, and he's also one of my biggest influences. I covered one of his songs, "Storm Chaser," back in 2015, and that's how I discovered him. And then I discovered that he also does artwork. So it's like, it was always been a dream of mine to have him do artwork for, one of my upcoming releases. So we came up with what I call the groovy cat concept, because if you ever walk into like a Chinese restaurant, you would see kind of like a lucky cat and its arm is kind of waving kind of like this. And I always had this concept that like it would make such a great t-shirt design, or like it would make such an awesome logo. So it's like, yeah, what if I always think like whenever I see those cats in the Chinese restaurants doing that, I always think like, what would it look like if this cat was like holding a guitar, for example? And so I thought that was just a really cool concept. So I told Sean, yeah, I want to, for this that groovy EP, I've always had this concept in mind of a lucky cat, a lucky beckoning cat holding a guitar. And so I told him that he could pretty much have free artistic reign on this concept, whether he wanted to do it like 3D rendering like this or just,
Hmm.
2D like anime style. And so he said, "Oh, I'll just go ahead and do it with the 3D concept." So he showed me a sketch. I'm like, "Wow, like you really nailed this one. Like this looks really awesome." And he even like added the blue in there to like match my hair and stuff like that to make it more, kind of like me. So I was like, "Yeah, this is great." And then I also wanted to get that like Japanese typography in there as well to get groovy, to kind of, emulate, sort of like an anime kind of cover. And so that's how this whole EP, came into play. And here's the back cover if you want to take a look at that. That's kind of what that looks like. He just kind of took elements from the front and then just copied the guitar on the back, which is really, really cool. And here's how the actual CD looks as well. So, yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah, you're actually down here, but I got to remember to look at the camera up there. So
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
super cool. And did you know Sean? It sounds like you knew him as a guitar player on the Candy Rat label before that.
Yeah, so I
Um,
discover a lot of these modern contemporary, guitarists like Sean DeBorca, Adrian Belew, Van Larkins. I all discovered them, well, either through the fingerstyle community on Facebook or on Candy Rat Records. That's how I was aware of all of these people's names. So I started becoming very active, like in the fingerstyle community, starting in 2015. That's when I really started getting into composing in modern fingerstyle. And I just think it's really cool how the fingerstyle community is a global community that connects people all around the world, not just in your local circle, for example. You can connect with anyone that's people. There's a huge Facebook group. I don't know if you're a part of it, but it's called Fingerstyle Hub. And it's basically a Facebook group with like, I don't know, like almost at 20,000 members or something like that. And so that's a great way. Being in that group and being in those circles is a great way to discover, these artists, these up and coming artists, whether they're like on Candy Rat or, they're just starting with fingerstyle guitar. So I just think it's really amazing that we have a community like this. We have a global community, especially during this pandemic. It's a great way for us to connect, and it's a great way for us to, discover new artists within that circle and within that genre.
well, it is kind of interesting that you use the word genre because it really has become, like you said, a
Yeah.
global community for a very kind of specific way of approaching the guitar as a solo instrument, Who are some of the, idols or players that influenced you early on?
So most notably, the most notable one is Andy McKee. So this is how I got into sort of the modern percussive fingerstyle guitar. But I was actually into fingerstyle guitar and altered tunings since I was very young. So I started playing guitar when I was 8 years old, and my dad was a huge traditional fingerstyle fan. So he had, there was this magazine called Fingerstyle Guitar Magazine, and he would subscribe to that, and each of those magazines would come with like a compilation CD with the different fingerstyle artists and stuff, and he would cover and play those songs while I was in the womb, like before I was born. So like he would play it into my mom's womb basically, and he would think that I would hear all of that music coming through. And then growing up, that is pretty much what I listened to, was his fingerstyle guitar compilations and CDs. And he was a huge fan of Lawrence Juber. I would say Lawrence Juber is the one that got me into fingerstyle guitar. Might not necessarily be the Candy Rat stuff that we see today, but these guys were active in the 90s, which is around the time I was born, and I was listening to a lot of that stuff growing up. And so early on, my dad is a guitarist, so he taught me just the basic chords, like your E, A, D, C, F, G, stuff like that. But then, using those chords, I would like create my own finger style melodies. I, experimented around with, playing around with bass melody, not percussion yet, but just, overlaying bass lines and melodic lines on top of those. And that's kind of how I got started with fingerstyle guitar, was because I listened to his Lawrence Juber CDs, and I listened to, Tommy Emmanuel and stuff like that. And I just knew that that was the direction that I wanted to go in. I've always started with acoustic guitar. That's always been my thing. And I always knew from the very start that I wanted to be a fingerstyle guitarist and composer very, very early on. So I was doing that. And then, I discovered people who were doing altered tunings, because after a while I started hearing just the regular standard stuff, and it kind of sounded a little bit more like finger picking with the Travis picking and the alternating bass, kind of like the country kind of style. And I was kind of looking for something a little bit different. And then I discovered Don Ross's Klimbim, and he was using this really cool open tuning that, I don't even remember what the tuning is, but I thought it sounded great. And so I started writing songs. I was like, oh, that's so cool. You can change the tunings on the guitar, and you can, get a whole array and landscape of sounds, just by changing the tunings, because sometimes the standard tuning can be a little bit limiting, because there's only a certain amount of chord shapes that you can do on standard tuning. Or if you wanted to go for a certain chord in standard tuning, you would have to stretch, or you can't get that low end because you're limited to the two low E and the high E and stuff like that. So I was looking for ways how can I achieve these interesting chord structures and stuff like that? How can I achieve that by just the limitations of the 6 strings? Well, you can always tune the guitar down to whatever open chord, and that's always been the joke with alternate tunings, is that once you change the tuning on the guitar, you strum it, it already sounds good, and you only have to put down 2 fingers to get the chord shapes and stuff that you want. And so that's what I discovered when I started hearing Don Ross doing the alternate tuning thing, and I started hearing Antoine Dufour, and this was kind of before the Candy Rat days. This was maybe during the 2000s when I discovered this. And then that's when I started just writing my own songs, just in the alternate tunings. Basically, I just wrote my own songs using the tunings that Don Ross and Antoine and all of them use. Then from there, I came up with my own tunings. So if Don was using a certain tuning, I would okay, to get this voicing or this chord shape, let me see if I can tune, the B string, for example, like a couple of steps up and see what kind of chord voicings I can get with it. I don't really have much of like an agenda when it comes to, discovering alter tunings. It's more like a sense of trial and error. So I would start off with a tuning that I already know. And then, like, let's say I wanted to get a sound or a chord by just like literally changing a couple of strings. Like, let's see what happens when I tune this string up like a step and then this other string down a couple of steps. Let's see what I can come up with there. And so that was kind of my whole introduction into alternate tunings. It was around the 2000s when I started hearing about John Ross and Antoine Dufour. But it wasn't until high school when I discovered Andy McKee, and I think that was the game changer for me. It was around like 2011 when I was in high school. And I was like, now I'm still trying to find something different. I'm just hearing kind of the same stuff. I want to find something fresh and new. And so, I was just going on YouTube one day, and then I see like Andy McKee drifting, something like that. And that's most that's most people's introduction into modern fingerstyle guitar. So I click on it, and then I see this guy doing over the neck playing, in Dad Dad, and he's like doing two hand tapping, and it's like, well, I've never seen this before. Like, this is really fascinating. This is, something that I want to do. This is what I want to incorporate into my playing. So I was really just blown away, not only by the technique, but I would say by the composition itself, because I'm more sold on, the composition of the song itself. If it's a catchy song and I can sing it back in my head and I can remember it, I think it's a great song. The techniques and pyrotechnics aside, I always think of, techniques as just something that adds to the whole. I never want to be just remembered, for the technique itself. I want to be remembered for creating a great song that has a nice groove, a nice melody, something that, people can remember. And that's what Andy McKee, I think, had. He had that perfect balance between technique and writing a catchy and memorable song. And then I clicked another one of the links, and I believe it was Art of Motion. And that is probably one of my favorite Andy McKee pieces to date, is Art of Motion. I clicked on that. I was like, oh, wow, this is such a really catchy, groovy song. It didn't have as many of the pyrotechnics as, say, drifting, but I thought it was more memorable than drifting because I could sing it back in my head. And like, yeah, this is almost like listening to a pop song, but like on instrumental. And so I was like, yeah, that's definitely the direction that I want to go in. And then I discovered that he plays harp guitar. And so now you're adding a whole nother dimension to the acoustic guitar, because you have the 6 sub bass strings on top of what you're doing on the other 6 strings on the bottom. And I just thought that was so fascinating, because I was talking about depth and how, like, with the standard tuning, you're just limited to the low E and the high E. I was looking for that depth. But then you're talking about adding 6 more sub bass strings on top of just the regular guitar strings. And now it's like, oh, wow, now you can almost be like playing bass and, melody on top of the bass. And it's probably the most beautiful, in my opinion, the most beautiful sounding instrument on the planet is the harp guitar. And I've always wanted one. And so that's why I was like, I'm totally sold on this. This is the style that I want to play. And so throughout high school, I pretty much covered a lot of Andy McKee's stuff. I've at least attempted to play all of the songs on his Joyland record at some point, because I was so inspired by it. And so I did that, and then I also discovered other people that did that, but like existed before Andy McKee. So Preston Reed is another example of that. He did this song called Tribes, and it's very similar, I think, to drifting. And that's the song that I learned instead of drifting. And so, in college, that was kind of my go-to song, because I wasn't really like writing in that style just yet. I was just kind of getting into the percussive thing, and I was just doing covers of, Andy McKee and Preston Reed and Don Ross. I was pretty much covering at that point, because I wanted to learn the ropes of like whatever they were doing, and then eventually be able to apply it to whatever I was doing. So it was around 2014 when I went off to college at UC Davis. That was when I think everything kind of clicked in terms of composition. Because up until that point, I had just been covering Andy McKee, Preston Reed, Don Ross, all of those guys. And then, one Friday night in the dorms, I was in a Preston Reed tuning. And this is kind of the story behind the song Telepathy, which is track number 3 off of the Get Groovy album. So that song is actually the very first modern percussive fingerstyle song that I'd ever written. So basically, I was playing around and, in Preston Reed's tuning. And then I came up with this kind of African groove and beat. So I also have a lot of background in jazz music and, African American music as well. I was in jazz bands throughout high school and college, and I feel like that had such a profound influence on my playing as well. I might be a solo artist, but I've had, experience with playing around in ensembles and playing in groups. I think that's the most important part of developing groove, really, is, being able to play with other people, because you could be playing by yourself and then you join a group of people and, it doesn't lock in, it doesn't groove. I think that's the best way to teach groove, which is, what I'm all about. It's in my name. So basically, locking in that groove, that comes from just jamming and playing with other people and having experience with playing with other people. And so that's, I think, the best way to teach it, because it's really hard to teach and explain groove, because you can only say like 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and so many times. So it's kind of like at that point you have to really internalize and feel that groove. So, and the only way to do that is by, playing along with a backing track or playing with a group. So that's where I get, most of the groove stuff from. So I was playing along with this African kind of groove that, was inspired by jazz and stuff. And then I had this chord shape and I was kind of moving it up and down the neck. And this is going back to how I composed Telepathy. And so it just all came together, and I ended up, writing that song within a month or so, just kind of coming up with the different sections, coming up with sections that I liked, things like that. And then, that was it. By the end of, I think by Thanksgiving that year, I had written Telepathy, and that was the very first modern percussive fingerstyle song that I had written. And I'd gotten my influences, of course, from like people like Preston Reed, and then jazz as well, jazz music. So the chords that I chose were, very kind of jazzy kind of sounding. And I was able to play those jazz chords just all in an alternate tuning pretty much. And so, yeah, that was like the biggest, I think, sense of accomplishment at that point. Cause I told myself like, yeah, I could write in this style, and I can continue writing in this style, using my influences from jazz, using my influences from alternative rock as well, because I talked about earlier the importance of creating a song that is catchy and people can remember. So when I am composing, I often kind of try to imagine myself like as if I was writing for like an alternative rock band or writing a pop song, because sometimes I would just use that basic pop song structure, the verse, chorus kind of thing. And a lot of my songs have that structure, but sometimes I like to play around with that structure a little bit. So I'm always, when I'm writing music, I'm always thinking about like, how can I make this song memorable? How can I make it catchy? And most importantly, how can I make it groove? And so that was the song that pretty much opened a lot of doors to composing other pieces. And like those other tracks on the album as well were compositions that I had written throughout my college years. So I recently graduated from UC Davis in 2018. And so after 2018, when I graduated, I thought like, what a great time to start recording an album or an EP. So I wanted to pick, songs, like 4 of my strongest songs that I had written throughout like 2014 to 2018, and record them in the studio. So I went ahead and recorded them at a local studio. I recorded those 4 songs during like, I think the winter of 2018, something like that. and then released Somewhere Warmer in late 2019 as the lead single to the Get Groovy EP. So I always had this, project in mind, the Get Groovy EP. Didn't really settle on that title until much later. I was thinking that it would just be called Somewhere Warmer EP. But, I already had a single out there that was called Somewhere Warmer. So I always had that Get Groovy catchphrase in my mind. I wanted to save it for my full length album, but, why not go ahead and do it right now, as kind of a branding thing. So I went ahead and did that. And so here we are, I released my debut EP, just about a month ago, almost exactly a month ago. And I'm really happy to see all of those songs finally out there. It's always been such a dream of mine to have all my songs on like Spotify and iTunes. It's definitely been a long time coming because I didn't really have the resources back in college. I didn't have my, expensive Perk guitar and, things like that. I didn't have all of that equipment. But now that I do, I thought like this is a great time to get all of that music out there. And so that's kind of what I'm going to start focusing on, throughout the pandemic is just recording instead of focusing on live performance, which I miss. But, I do have a lot of unreleased songs from college that I'd like to start releasing, in the next year or so. And so I've got my studio all set up in my room, my home studio. So most likely the album that I'm going to come out with pretty soon is going to be recorded here at home pretty much and mixed and mastered by my good friend Alex Anderson, also a great Candy Rat artist and harp guitarist as well. So he's really great. So yeah, that's pretty much the story behind Get Groovy.
That's awesome. And or is there going to be any harp guitar on the record, or do you play harp guitar as well?
I don't own one right now, but like there is this company called Timberline Harp Guitars that does make pretty affordable harp guitar instruments because sometimes it can be on the upwards of like $4,000, things like that. I don't have that kind of money, but Timberline makes harp guitars that are like, I don't know, kind of great quality for the price. So, maybe like in the future, I'm going to order something from them. And, I feel like that'll really open up a lot of possibilities in terms of my palette and my composition. So that would be great to be able to write and compose on the harp guitar eventually.
Right. It's an insane instrument. And I guess, a long history that I don't know a whole lot about in terms of, the early Gibson harp guitars and
yeah.
But there's a fellow in the Twin Cities in Minneapolis actually who is a friend of mine and we play together and he plays a custom made harp guitar and does clinics and he's part of this whole circuit of harp guitarists in the States, which every time I see him play and I look over I have no idea what he's like one part of the neck I kind of recognize, but everything else I'm like, how are you, muting all the strings and everything?
It's a different instrument. I did try a harp guitar like a couple of times at NAMM, and it does take some getting used to because you can't really see what you're doing, I guess, on the bottom because the top part is covering that. So you kind of have to like look over to see what you're doing. So it does take a little, getting used to. But it's not something that's totally impossible, I don't think. Like if I had like a week or something to work on the harp guitar, I could probably get some of the basic skills down. But, owning a harp guitar would be up there as a dream. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing. Do you, so the guitars you play right now, I think you mentioned the brand earlier, but is that a manufacturer that you've been kind of working with for a while?
Yeah, so I'm endorsed by FERC or Stonebridge Guitars. So I knew them as Stonebridge Guitars back in the day because that's when a lot of Candy Rat artists were using Stonebridge. So they were operating under that name. That's kind of their North American name, I guess, and Canada name. But I think like in the European countries, it's called FERC. It's spelled F-U-R-C-H. So like people would say Furch, which I did at one point, but I believe it's pronounced FERC, like with a K at the end, kind of. So they're amazing, amazing guitars. It's always been my dream to have either a Stonebridge FERC or Loudon guitar because, back in the day, back in college, all I had was a $150 guitar. It's a Charvel acoustic from the 1980s. So Charvel's an electric guitar manufacturer, but they did make acoustic guitars, laminated acoustic guitars back in the day. And so that was the guitar that actually got me into the percussive style, because I was working at a music store, near my area, and like I was gravitated to this guitar, and like my boss would see me playing this guitar all the time. It's like, oh, she probably really likes that. So my dad bought that guitar for me, while I was working there in high school, and so and my boss sold it to us for a discount. So I really just liked the little quirks about it. Sometimes like there's like a buzz like on the third fret or something like that. So every time I hit that note, it's like this nasty like buzzing sound. Or like there's this gap between one of the frets and the neck. And like when I'm performing, sometimes like I'd be getting into it, and then the high E string would get caught underneath the fret in the middle of the song, and then I have to pull it out in the middle of the song. Oh, good times. But I really love the quirks about that guitar, and that guitar is so special to me, no matter how cheap it was, but because that's what really kind of got me into the percussive style, because I liked the action on it. I liked how it sounded big despite it just being, an ordinary $150 guitar. So I don't know if our screen just went black there, but I just got like a little notification.
Oh,
but
you're back
yeah.
now.
Yeah. Okay. But yeah, so that, that $150 guitar I think was so integral to my growth. And I also had a Seagull guitar as well. So one of my influences is Peppino D'Agostino.
Mm-hmm.
And he used a Seagull guitar, and he was one of the artists that my dad really enjoyed listening to. So I had that Seagull guitar as well when I was 10 years old, but I think the problem with it was like the action was really high. So it was hard for me to do kind of like the two-hand tapping kind of stuff. But the Charvel acoustic allowed me to do that, because the strings were a little bit closer to the frets, and it was more conducive to percussive guitar playing. So that was the guitar that I used throughout all 4 of my college years, and I had been just saving up. I had really no expectations in terms of endorsements and stuff like that. I just was saving up all of that hard-earned money to buy a better quality instrument. So, when I graduated from college, I thought like, oh, this is a great time to get a little bit of an upgrade, because, I'm going to be recording an album. I want it to sound great. I want things to sound really, really big and full and stuff like that. So I was like, yeah, it's definitely time to do an upgrade. So I went ahead and, filled out the Stonebridge for, I think it was the artist collaboration application. Back in the day, I went ahead and filled out that application with no expectations at all. I just thought, okay, maybe this is a great way to get some sort of a discount, because they're pretty high quality instruments, for the price and things like that. So I didn't have any expectations. I just, filled out the application, just like sent it out, sent them my links and stuff. And then I hear back from them, and they said like, congratulations, you're now like a Stonebridge for artists, things like that. And that was like one of the happiest days of my life, because it was like, this was like my dream company to be working with. This was the company where I saw all of these Candy Rat artists, that and Loudon. I think the thing with Loudon's was they're a little bit on the bigger side. So, I'm a little smaller bodied, so it's a little bit harder for me to navigate through the Loudons. But I think the Stonebridge guitars are a little bit smaller. They're a little bit more suited to my body size, and they sound big for, a smaller size guitar. So I was really excited when that happened. I was really stoked. And, I ended up buying one of the guitars that they were phasing out. They're doing like this new thing now, like where they have a new line of guitars, 2018 onward. But like, I wanted to get, the old, vintage style guitars that they had, back in the day when I discovered Candy Rat and all of that. I wanted the older stuff. And so I got the last of one of their older models. And I've had that thing with me for about 2 years, and that's what I used to record the Get Groovy EP, and I'm really happy with that. It's really, I was really happy about that. So it's great.
And I imagine a lot of fans of not only the guitar company, but all the all the Candy Rat artists probably, that's a nice way to connect with them in terms of your music too, right?
Definitely, yeah. So I believe Adrian Belew has been a Stonebridge Firk artist for a really, really long time. So that was one of my introductions to Stonebridge and Firk. A lot of the Fret Monkey Records people are part of that as well. So, a lot of them were Stonebridge artists at one point, and that was my introduction into the brand as well. People like Van Larkins. I think Van Larkins was the first person that I had seen use a Stonebridge or Firk guitar. So like he was playing at the Canadian Guitar. I was watching a video of him on YouTube playing at the Canadian Guitar Festival, and I see this beautiful guitar and had like an S on the headstock. I'm like, I need to figure out who has manufactured that guitar. And then I discovered that it was Stonebridge and Firk, and I was just like, yeah, I'm gonna save up for this. I'm gonna, use all my hard-earned money. I'm gonna save up for that, and eventually I got my dream guitar, and it was great.
Hmm. And is this a guitar that has like the fanned frets that you see a lot, or
No, it
fairly
doesn't have.
standard dimensions?
But my introduction into fan frets as well was Andy McKee. I saw, I guess his luthier is Greenfield, Michael Greenfield,
Hmm.
and he, makes his guitars, and they have like the fan frets and stuff like that. But I don't know. I don't think I've ever tried a fan fret guitar, but I heard it was more ergonomic, for the way that our hand stretches and stuff like that. So it'd be really fascinating to be able to try out a fan fret guitar at some point.
Yeah, from what limited experience I have with, there's a local luthier here, a good friend of mine plays one that has the fanned, the splayed
Hmm.
frets, and it
Yeah,
seems like it makes the, especially for alternate tunings, it makes the
yeah,
low strings have sufficient tension.
right.
And I'm just curious about that. Now,
Yeah.
how did you like a lot of the percussive techniques? It seems like that's a whole school of thought now, since Michael Hedges and on. And
Hmm.
how did you learn a lot of the, just the finger placement, where to put your hands, where to get those kind of sounds? Was it from YouTube, or was it from a specific teacher or player, or?
So it was all kind of a matter of experimentation and trial and error, pretty much at that point. So, like I was saying earlier, my introduction into altered tunings was Don Ross and
Mhm.
Antoine, and I would, I don't really have. Some people would ask me like, what is your preferred like, what tuning do you frequent? What's your preferred intervals to use? Something like that. But I don't really think about it in terms of intervals. It's more like, okay, let me, tune this string down and let's see what kind of chord it produces. And then I would try the different shapes on top of that, because there are some shapes that I have kind of memorized more or less, for open C, for example, or dadgad. They would all use similar shapes. But then sometimes I have to adjust those shapes to get a certain chord or a certain sound. So if it ends up being too far to reach, for example, or if I
Mhm.
wanted, more of like a certain bass note, I'd be like, okay, let me tune this down. Let me see if I can get that bass note. And then I would try it out, and like either it would work out or it would be like, okay, now I got to stretch even more. So let's put it back, kind of thing. So it ends up almost being sort of a trial and error kind of thing. And so it's also important to see the different patterns, that you make with your left hand as well, because there's certain shapes that work and certain voicings and like double stops and harmonies
Mhm.
that, work within like a certain altered tuning. It's
Mhm.
different from one tuning to the next. So I kind of have like an inventory in my mind as to like what the different shapes are. And then, let's say I'm arranging a song. So, like, basically arranging a popular song for acoustic guitar. Let's say I'm arranging a song and I can kind of hear the different chords within that song. And I think, like, oh, an open C would work for the chords that are being used in this particular song. Let me try that. And if
Mhm.
I'm not really getting the voicings that I want in open C, let's try open D or like open G or something like that. And then the tuning almost never really ends up being open D or like a strict open D or like a strict open G. It ends up being a variation of that, where
Mhm.
like, in order to get a certain bass note or like a certain interval or something like that, you know, I would change the tuning of one of the strings so I can get that. And then, that's when the shapes start to come together. So I like to think about it this way. I'm starting off with, just a familiar tuning that I
Hmm.
already know, and then using that tuning, just trial and error, kind of experimenting around with changing one or two strings at a time, and then putting down the shapes that I need. And then once I can, form those shapes with ease, and I'm able to get the melodic lines in there with ease, then I would eventually just like settle on that tuning. So yeah, so basically it ends up just being, a period of experimentation and trial and error for me.
And a lot of the kind of body percussion, for lack of a better word, a lot of the drum, snare drum and kick drum kind of sounds. Since it's not really something that's formalized, it seems yet. Like you can't go to any average teacher in a music shop and learn really how to do that. How was a lot of that just through watching videos of people like Andy McKee?
I think so, more or less, and
Mm-hmm.
covering, Andy McKee and
Mm.
Preston Reed. So I didn't really think about it in terms of a drum kit at
Mm.
first. I just thought like, oh, boom, chick, kind of thing. I didn't really think about it in terms of like, oh, slapping on the strings is the snare, or
Mm.
hitting your palm against the soundboard is a bass drum. I just thought those are ways that I can implement groove,
Mm.
basically, because groove is such an important part of music. It kind of tightens everything up, because if you didn't have that percussion in there, you'd end up being like in free time, for example. So it's like the icing on the cake. It really kind of just holds everything together. So I guess more or less I did learn the percussive stuff off of YouTube. So like I'm pretty much self-taught from the beginning. Well, my dad taught me just basic chords,
Mm-hmm.
but I learned all the fingerstyle stuff and techniques just on my own. Without I never took lessons with a guitar instructor or anything like that. Which is interesting because now, I'm a guitar instructor myself now. So now it's interesting when I'm teaching, the percussive techniques, how much actually goes into it. So it's easier to explain those things in terms of the drum kit, because the drum kit is something that most people more or less are familiar with. So it's like, okay, so this is your bass drum, things like
Mm-hmm.
that. And then tapping against the soundboard could be like a tom or like a snare, depending on what you want it to be. So it was more like, for me, locking in kind of a groove, and then learning how Andy McKee and all of them are able to do that. And so watching a video, I think, is very helpful as well, because you can visually see what they're doing, as opposed to just listening to it on a record. So I think that's the
Mm-hmm.
great thing with YouTube and videos these days, because sometimes my students would ask me questions, especially about the percussive stuff, and they're like, okay, it's kind of hard to see here, how are you doing that? So what I would do is like I would just like take a video of myself doing the percussive techniques, doing it nice and slowed down, so they
Mm-hmm.
can actually see what's going on, because there's a lot that can go into it. There's a lot that you can miss even from just a simple video, I think. So I think that's the thing with me too. It's like, oh, how is he, like, at first I didn't really know, like with the pinch harmonic or the harp harmonics,
Mm-hmm.
like how are they doing it? Like I didn't realize at first that they're doing this with their thumb. They're plucking the string. I thought they were just like hovering their finger over the fret, and somehow magically like sound was coming out, kind of thing. But that's, yeah, from videos, that's kind of where I learned the different types of techniques. Eventually I learned like, oh yeah, you do this and then you pluck on top of it, and that's what creates sound. And sometimes when you're learning it from a song, it goes so fast, so you can't
Mm-hmm.
really like keep up with what's happening, or like you have to slow it down. But back in the day, back in early YouTube, there was no way to actually like slow it down. So I ended up just kind of making it my own. So like, if I'm learning an Andy McKee song, or if I'm learning a Preston Reed song, it's not going to be note for note. I'm piecing together, whatever I'm hearing, using ear training, and like trying to replicate that, even though it's not exactly what Andy or Preston might be doing. It's like, okay, I'm going to listen to them and then just see what I can piece together from this. And that's what I also encourage when I'm teaching. you don't have to learn something completely note for note. Like if your picking pattern fits within the 4/4 time, that's good with me. If you're able to fit that within the groove and the structure, and it
Hmm.
doesn't really change the definition of the song, then I'm all about it. I'm all about just taking something and just making it your own by piecing together what you're hearing or what you think it sounds like.
Right. I feel so. Do you? A lot of those students, are you teaching them online right now, or
Yeah,
some
so I
kind of hybrid
actually
approach, or?
Yeah, so, well, it would be nice to have that hybrid approach, but I don't currently live in Davis, California right now. So that's where I guess I'm based, like Davis and Sacramento, but I
Mhm.
recently moved back home since college. So basically, I did teach at a music store in Davis, California, which is a suburb of Sacramento. So I taught there, for like 3 years, and I still do. But now, like you said, all the lessons are being moved on Zoom, kind of like
Mhm.
this. So everything that I'm doing right now is virtual. But I think, that opens up a lot for me because I don't do this full time. I have a full time job on top of this as well. So I'm juggling a lot. So I think the beauty with Zoom lessons is that it takes away the commute factor because, to get to Watermelon Music in Davis, I would have to take a train to get there and, things like that, public transportation, that whole thing. But that's also the thing that I miss about it too, was that adventure of hopping on a train, spending the day, grabbing lunch with a friend, things like that.
Mhm.
That's what I do miss about that adventure of teaching in person because you get that one-on-one interaction with your student that you're missing out on with virtual lessons. You can easily like correct their fingers if they're like in the wrong place. It's
Mhm.
easier, quicker, and you can play together with your student, which is often difficult, with Zoom lessons because of the lag and things like that. But I think we're all finding ways to adapt to this coronavirus situation more or less. So I think the advantage with the Zoom meetings is again, cutting down on the commute expenses and travel because that does cost money.
Mhm.
You're paying for a train, you're paying for bus fare and stuff like that. But if you're just kind of doing it from your home, there's no commute. You literally just log in, log out, and you're pretty much done. So I think now that I'm doing that, I'm able to take on more students than I'm normally able to
Mhm.
because I'm able to fit it. It's more flexible now. I can fit it. I'm working from home now. My day job is at home. And also, my teaching job is at home as well. So everything can be just done on anyone's schedule and flexibility. And, although I don't have any students outside of Davis, California right now, I could technically teach someone like on the
Mhm.
East Coast, for example, just a matter of a 3 hour time difference and just kind of calculating that. So now you're not just limited to your own local circle. Now you can actually teach someone in a different time zone or a different country if the time change is not so drastic. You could do that. I think it just enables more flexibility in terms of time and effort put in. So now it's great. I'm able to take on more students than I'm normally able to now just because of that flexibility factor with teaching online.
Mm. It seems like that's something that I guess you technically could have done before the pandemic, but it wouldn't have occurred to a lot of us to, like you said, use Zoom or some other platform for a lesson. And I guess
Yeah, it's
there
a
are certain
great way to
advantages to that.
Yeah, it's a great way, I think, to just compensate for that because I think the benefits of, teaching one on one in person are a little bit more than just the Zoom because, again, the person to person interaction, the routine of getting out of your house and going somewhere to teach, I really enjoyed that. And, Davis, California is a town that I have many connections and ties to, because a lot of the songs that I've written are inspired by the experiences that I had in Davis, California. So there's a bit of an emotional attachment there. So I
Mhm.
haven't been to Davis like since the pandemic started because there's really no other reason to be there other than to, at least right now, than to teach and things like that. And
Mhm.
a lot of the gigs that I play, a lot of the shows that I play are around Davis and Sacramento. And so, just being immersed in that city, I think, is such a huge source of creativity and inspiration for me, just being like in a certain location because you
Hmm.
can experience more. You have memories and experiences and all of that, attached to a location. So I think that's mainly what I'm missing out on, at least for, teaching, one-on-one things like that, and having that routine of going up to Davis every Saturday to teach. So that's the thing that I think I'm really missing out on. But it's great to have a way to compensate for that, with the dawn of Zoom and things like that. A lot of us teachers are still able to make a living out of
Hmm.
what we're able to do. We're able to continue doing that because because of technology, like this. It enables us to continue doing what we love to do for a living.
Now, have a lot of your performances, have they been canceled at this point, or are they
Yep.
rescheduled for next year,
Yeah.
or?
So I usually play kind of like the bigger festivals around the Davis and Sacramento area. And that's like festival season is that one season that I look forward to every year because, just the crowd, the energy, playing to tons of people, things like that. I really enjoy having that experience. So yeah, I was kind of bummed when like the big Davis festivals had gotten canceled, and
Hmm.
I was just like, oh man, like I was looking forward to this all year, and now I got to wait a whole nother year in order to be able to play this same festival. So there's like I think like 3 or 4 major festivals around Davis that I was scheduled to play, and every single one of them canceled. Every single one, and even like I think I did have this smaller gig that I was gonna play. I don't know if you know Janet Noguera. She's also an amazing
Mm.
guitarist. You should definitely check her out. She's around my area, San Francisco Bay Area, California. So you should definitely check her out. But we were scheduled to play a show like back in March in Davis, and that was like literally 1 week after like our county like ordered like a stay at home mandate, because I believe like San Francisco and the surrounding areas were the first people to do the lockdown. So I got
Hmm.
that notification like yeah, we can't really leave our houses right now, so we can't travel up to that gig. So ended up canceling that, and that was pretty much it. So now like most of my performances have been channeled into the live streaming thing, which I'm sure
Mm.
you've seen plenty of people like on Facebook doing the whole live streaming thing, which I did for a little bit, but then after a while I felt like, oh, like people are going to be kind of burnt out on the live streams because they see
Mm.
so many different people doing it. So like you either need to have like, I don't know, some people like to do it regularly. With me, I like to just kind of do it every once in a while to keep things fresh, so like
Mm.
people don't get tired of seeing my face, things like that. But but yeah, it's some people have a weekly schedule, some people do it every once in a while, things like that. But I did I believe a couple of Instagram lives. I did a live stream in the Fingerstyle Hub group that I was talking about
Mm.
earlier on Facebook, the one that has like 20K members, something like that. They did this Fingerstyle Hub festival thing, and they would grab like I think 20 or so different fingerstyle artists from within that community, and they would have them do a set like I think every other Saturday or something like that. So
Mm.
they were doing that for quite some time, when the quarantine first started back in April. So I got invited to play at the second Fingerstyle Hub festival, and so I did that, and like it's a different experience, I think, because now like you have I don't know how many eyes watching you, because this is such a huge group. This is like we're talking 20K
Hmm.
members, something like that. So anyone can tune in at any time. So like I guess the nervousness factor, it's a little bit more stressful there, because you can see like some of your heroes are watching. You can see if some of your heroes are watching you perform. Like I saw that like coming up, because you could see like if you're Facebook live streaming, you could see who's watching, and like
Hmm.
I would see all of these names that I look up to. They're like watching my live stream, so it's like no pressure, kind of thing. So but then it's a little different because they're watching, but then like you're seeing yourself. You're not like seeing any other people's faces. So it's like, I think everyone, who was live streaming on that day did feel that nervousness to some extent, because if you're playing, you mess up, then that gets saved somewhere and people can
Hmm.
see you. They can watch that video and see you kind of screw up, things like that. But it was a great experience. It was like definitely an honor to be a part of that, the Fingerstyle Hub Festival, and I'd love to see them do that more. I think they stopped doing. They took a break from it for now,
Mm.
but maybe like later on in the year, it would be great to see some other artists, on that bill. And again, because it's a global community, you can get people from like all over the world, and even with the time differences, things worked out. Like like Janet, my friend, I think she had her set like 7 a.m. California time. It's like so early, right? Because I don't know, because California tends to be kind of like behind the rest of the world in terms of
Hmm.
time zones, things like that. So, but luckily, luckily mine was not that early. But despite all of those time differences, they're able to get all of these different people to show up on the bill, whether they're in like China or Italy or like wherever, East Coast. They're able to organize that schedule so that everyone from all over the world has the chance to play. And I think that's really amazing.
It's kind of an odd experience too. It seems like, on the one hand, you're on paper you're playing in your house
Yeah,
to your computer or a camera, and there's no face to face interaction. But also, like you said,
yeah.
20,000 people around the world, including some of your idols, could be tuning in at any moment.
Yeah, I guess the beauty of it too is like people can comment. So you can like literally, like, let's say it's your own live stream and you can have like a couple of friends and stuff like that commenting. You could like scroll through the comments and then like respond to those comments. So like I would get questions about, oh, what tuning are you in? Things like what strings do you use? Like the standard questions. And I would be able to answer those questions like on the fly. It's just a matter of me
Hmm.
just scrolling through some comments and then addressing those questions. So I think that is the cool part about live stream, is because you can have those one-on-one interactions with your fans in real time, because while you're playing in a live setting, you obviously, people can't be like raising their hands in the middle of the performance and asking what kind of strings do you use, kind of thing. But at least with the live streaming, you're able to address those and kind of talk about that as you're like talking and tuning in between pieces. So I
Hmm.
think that's the really cool thing about an audience in a live stream setting.
Right, it seems a little bit less formal in a sense, but also there's
Yeah,
that immediate interaction that you maybe couldn't have otherwise,
yeah,
which is
definitely.
pretty cool.
Yeah.
Now, how did you decide to have the proceeds from your album going towards the COVID fund at UC Davis?
Yeah, so I've always, growing up as a Catholic, I have always had this idea of music being a ministry. So, when I was really young, I listened to fingerstyle, but I was also very involved in my church and I played guitar for church choir and stuff like that. And I always thought of music as a way to always to just give back to the
Mm.
community. It's not about myself. It's about using my gifts to help other people. So I wanted to exemplify those ideals of ministry as I was, donating the proceeds from that CD to go towards the COVID-19 fund, because
Hmm.
it's like it's all about helping other people, and there's so many people around the world right now that need our help. So what better way to do that than through the gift of music? So I thought about it as using a way to give my gift of music back to the community, because I can use music as a way to help other people and things like that. So yeah, I decided to donate all of the proceeds from that album towards the UC Davis COVID-19 fund. And UC Davis is a community that means so much to me. That was Davis, California. That's where I went to college. That's where I guess I got my start in modern fingerstyle guitar. And I'm so grateful for all of the memories and opportunities that I had in UC Davis and in the Davis, California city at large.
Hmm.
I'm so grateful to be able to give back to that community that has brought me up and has nurtured me. So I just thought it's such a cool way to give back to the community that has fostered, my musical growth in so many ways. So that's how I decided on that.
And when people go to your either your Bandcamp or I imagine the other, you have a few other platforms like Spotify. Um,
Yeah.
can they donate more than the cost of the album to this
Oh
fund?
yeah, yeah. I was going to talk about that actually. So my base price is $6, but then I've seen people donate, tons of money to, just
Hmm.
for like one CD, and it's like, oh, that is just so awesome because like I can let them basically pick their own price. So some people just pay the base price of $6 if that's all they can donate, or they can choose to pay a little extra, and I think that's the really cool thing about Bandzoogle, which is the
Hmm.
platform that I use for my website. So I recently switched over to Bandzoogle because it's more tailored specifically for musicians. So
Hmm.
basically, there's easier ways of selling your music on that platform and setting your own price and things like that. So I would, primarily direct, if you want to buy a CD, I would, direct them towards the website itself. And then, I think Bandcamp is doing like Bandcamp Fridays or something
Hmm.
like that, where like I guess every like first Friday of the month, or I don't really know, but like they pick a Friday in that month and they have the proceeds, all of the proceeds from the sales that you make go to the artist, so they don't take a cut basically. So I think that's a great thing that platforms like Bandcamp are doing, especially to help musicians who do make a living out of this, during this time because it's a hard time. So I'm glad that they're, offering those breaks, those cuts, so that the artists can get all of that revenue
Hmm.
back, at least on the first Friday of the month. So I do also have it on my Bandcamp page, but I primarily, if you want to buy a CD, I primarily direct people towards my website because Bandzoogle doesn't take, any cuts off of your sales.
Hmm.
So, but whereas with Bandcamp, they would at some point. So,
Sure.
yeah,
So, I'll definitely put a link to your website in the video,
great,
and
great, thank you.
people can get downloads and physical copies at this point.
Yeah, so if you buy a physical copy, you get a free digital
Hmm.
download as well. So that's a great way to support me. Or like if you want to just stream it on Spotify, that's totally fine as well. The album is on Spotify and iTunes and every other. I mean, I use CD Baby, so
Hmm.
it should be on all of any kind of whatever streaming or downloading platform that you prefer. It's on all of
Okay.
those major sites.
And for guitar players, are there any guitar specific purchases in there as well, like transcriptions or
I
things like
wish like
that?
at some point that's something that I'll look into, but right now I don't really have any
Hmm.
tabs for any of my music, but it's definitely something I'd love to look into in the future.
Yeah, awesome. Is there
Yeah.
anything else that you would like to mention, Kat, that we didn't really get to?
No, thank you so much for having me again, Ben. This was a great chat. I really enjoyed chatting about guitar and stuff with you,
Yeah,
so it's
this was
great.
awesome. And again, I'll definitely put a link to your website and your album in the video. And
Awesome. Great.
thanks
Thank
again
you.
for chatting.